Welcome to the video lecture of EE465 Sustainable Development of the Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University. This is a course for BE program. So this is our first ever class. So we're going to cover the SDG 101, the understanding of sustainable development and the sustainable development goals. The outline for this presentation includes two parts. The first part is about the SDG 101, and then we're going to talk about the fundamental knowledge of the Sustainable Development Goals, the global, regional, and national context, SDGs within Thailand's policy framework, and Thailand's role on the global stage. And the second part of the presentation will talk about the role of economics in advancing SDGs and sustainable development. So my plan is to divide this video into two parts because I don't want each part to be too long. So the first video will be about the SDG 101 and the second one will be the role of economics in advancing the SDGs and sustainable development. Okay, let's first talk about the SDG 101. When you encounter with SDGs, you are usually introduced to the 17 boxes, very colorful boxes of SDGs. But from my experience, if you go straight to the 17 boxes, it tends to mislead you to think about something else that is not aligned with the principle of sustainable development. So I think the right way to do it is to start with the principle that is underlying the sustainable development goals first, and then we move forward to be introduced to the 17 goals. So what kind of principle are we talking about? The first thing is about the principle of sustainable development. I mean, that's obviously one of the principles that we have to think about because it's in the name of the sustainable development goals. So sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is a standard version of the definition of sustainable development from the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future, published in 1987 by the World Commission on Environment and Development. And this definition talks about two things. Now, the first thing is intergenerational justice. So the very first key idea about sustainable development is about the fairness to our next generation. It relates to the question of what kind of world are we leaving for our children? What kind of environment and natural resources are we leaving for our children? The second point related to this definition is that this definition was formulated in the time when the world was concerning about the impact of economic growth on the environment. So it's not wrong if majority of the population understand that sustainability is about the environment, because at first it was about the environment. Yeah, so this is like the standard definition of sustainable development. And then later on in the 1990s, when the world started to shift their attentions toward the poverty, and then they learned that there are more complexity to the issue. I mean, poverty can be linked to environmental degradation, and vice versa. I mean, people might decide to deforest or cut the trees around their areas to expand their agricultural land just because they are poor. That could happen. So, and then they study many more things, and then they realize that actually the environment are connected to society and economy. So they come to a conclusion that if we want to achieve sustainable development, we need to have a balance between the society, economy, and the environment. So they introduced the concept called the three pillars of sustainable development. Actually, it was introduced since the 1992 conference in Rio, but let me bring you the one of the paragraph in the Johannesburg Declaration on Sustainable Development. It says, according to the other paragraphs before this, we assume a collective responsibility to advance and strengthen the interdependent and mutually reinforcing pillars of sustainable development: economic development, social development, and environmental protection at the local, national, regional, and global level. So this paragraph is presenting the complexity of the three pillars. First, the three pillars are connecting, they are interdependent, mutually reinforcing. If there's a change in one pillar, it's going to affect the other two pillars. And it's also multi-level. What happened at the local could potentially affect the national, regional, and global level. At the same time, what happened at the national level can either affect uh, local and the regional and global, can both affect local and regional and global level as well. So sustainable development challenge is not simple, and we can just solve them by asking people to have the awareness. We need much more than that because what is happening now is so complex. On the right side of the screen, you can see the three versions of the three pillars. So the figure A is the first version when we see the three pillars, a literal pillar, and each pillar is separated but at the same height. They're lifting the roof called sustainability. So the first one kind of misleading a little bit because it led people to think that each pillar can be worked separately. The second figure, B figure, is more practical and I think representing the complexity of the situation because it shows the interconnectedness of the three pillars, the three overlapping rings. So from the figure, the area where the three rings are intersecting, that is sustainable. In practice, I would say when we say we need to balance the three pillars, the real meaning is that if we do anything to improve one pillar, for example, you work in a university or you work in a firm, so that is economic pillar. You're improving the economic pillar. You have to make sure that the other pillars are not degrading. That means your action should not be having negative impact on other pillars. If if there are negative impacts, you need to find a way to deal with it. And figure C, this one is like the latest version of the three pillars, which I mean it can translate into words that if we want to be sustainable, the economy, which is embedded in society, is supposed to be operating within the boundary of society. At the same time, economy and society that is operating within the environment supposed to be operating within the environment boundaries. But right now, the reason that the world is not sustainable is because the economy and society is now operating beyond the environmental boundaries. We use resource more than we have for the future. Sometimes the economy actually caused problem to society. So this is like the latest version. It's actually derived from the fact that right now we know that human being is the main driving force of the global system, global environmental system. That's the concept we call Anthropocene, and we have been breaking the planetary boundaries many times. I mean, there are concept called planetary boundaries, and there are at least 9 systems related to the boundaries, and we have broken 2 of them, and maybe 2 or 3 of them we are on the way to break them. So this is a concept that derived from those concepts, Anthropocene and planetary boundary. So the Brundtland Report definition and the three pillars of sustainable development, these are the two standard things you need to learn when you talk about the definition of sustainable development. But when the SDG was introduced, there are other concepts that comes along, and it became really important in the concept of sustainable development. I can say that if we said we do things sustainable, but we didn't consider the following concepts, then we might not be able to say that we are doing things sustainable anymore. So we need to consider the other three concepts that follows as well, if we want to um, be considered as doing things sustainably. So the second concept is inclusive development. Leaving no one behind is the motto of this concept. I mean, it's straightforward. In the past, economic-led growth development, growth-led development, they are leaving someone behind because from the growth, only a few group of people benefiting from the growth, and the rest were not benefiting. So that's why had we have had inequality expanding. So inclusive development was aiming to solve the inequality and ensures that we have social inclusion and environmental inclusion at the very least. When we talk about social inclusion, we are talking about how can we make everyone benefit from development, have access to social, economic, political opportunities. Everyone has access to public services and various social welfare benefits they are entitled to. And when we talk about environmental inclusion, that means all communities should have access to utilize and manage the environment and natural resources nearby to their communities. And they should be protected from having these resources taken away. And they should have received support. They should receive support when facing crises and disasters. So, to put it simply, we have to care more about the vulnerable groups, the poor, and the disadvantaged. And we need to make sure that if we try to make something change, even now we want to go towards the green transition or sustainability, we need to make sure that no one is left behind. If we want to move towards green energy, we have to make sure that those who work in the fossil fuel are not left behind. If we want to move towards the EV, we have to make sure that the ones that are now working in the internal combustion engine sector is not left behind. Otherwise, they're going to be the first people who go against us. I think that's go the same for um, the PM 2.5 situation that we are having at the time we are recording this video. Um, the situation is the sugarcane farmer need to burn the sugarcane in order to harvest it. But I think almost all of society is blaming them for burning the sugarcane. Well, that's the cost of PM 2.5, of course. But then, if we just ban them from burning and it costs them everything, they will be the first. They have already been the first to say, no, I'm not stop burning because it's actually cost my livelihood. They've tried. From 100% right now, there are only 30% of a sugarcane that is burnt. No, but if we don't try to find a way to help the 30% to be able to shift toward the green sugarcane, they will keep they will keep burning. And if you ban them, they will be the first to go against everything we fight for. So we need to make sure that no one is left behind, and that's when we need science and technology. We need tools. We need innovation. We need um, fiscal measures like tax and subsidies to help them transit to sustainability with us. The third concept is about resilience. So the key terms of resilience is like resistant to shocks and adaptive capacity. So in the moving and changing world, new threat can emerge anytime. We cannot just stay still and strong, but we need to be able to adapt to change. You can either endure the sudden change or shocks, or if you can't, you just have to recover quickly to where you were. Or even better, if you can recover and then move on to the new state that is more resilient, that is a lot better. This is the concept resilience, and it applies to every level. Now, for example, at the individual level, resilience can be applied to the mental health situation, economic status. We can also use the concept resilience in adapting to climate disaster individually or at the household level. We can talk about resilience at the community level, at the national level, adapting to health crises, economic crises, environmental disasters. And this become really important because in the past 2 or 3 decades, the world has been changing fast due to globalization, due to climate change. So the resilience is now inevitable. We need to be resilient to survive. So we need to be sustainable to make sure that we don't cause any trouble, especially the environmental trouble. We need to be inclusive to make sure that we don't exacerbate inequalities and on the way also solve the inequality. And we need resilient development because we know that we have to deal with unexpected shocks and disasters in the future. These are the three characteristics of development that we need in addition or replacing the growth led development that we used to have. And we need these three characteristics in order to make sure that everyone in the world is having a good life with dignity in accordance with the universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the human rights is not only about the freedom of speech, of choice, or of politics, yeah, but it also the rights to the basic necessity of humanity. Yeah. So, so we are talking about that everyone should have a decent life with dignity. So just to conclude, at this point, the principle behind sustainable development goals include sustainable development, inclusive development, resilient development, and the human rights principles. You don't need to know the 17 goals, but if you stick to these four principles, it would be quite certain that you are heading towards the sustainable development directions. No. If you stick to the 17 goals but you violate all of these principles, you are not doing things sustainably. Okay, so at least have these in mind, think about it, and maybe try to apply to what you see in the world. Is that policy sustainable, inclusive, and resilient? Does it respect human rights? That will help you master these principles. Actually, these principles are aligned with the principle that the UN is working on. They are working based on six principles. These are four of the six. The other two is like gender equality and the accountability. So the sustainable development goals are the practicality of these principles. Now, they tell you in the real world in 2030 what the world should look like if it's to be sustainable. What kind of social and economic mechanism supposed to be in place to make sure that we have inclusive society and economy? What kind of mechanism and policies needed at which level to make sure that everyone is resilient to health crises, to climate disasters? And if we uh, take 169 target of SDGs and map with the details of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also human rights covenants, it will be almost perfectly aligned with each other. So, so SDGs is the practical um, practical visions of this principle, what the world would look like in 2030 if it's going to be sustainable, inclusive, and resilient world. Yeah, and this is 20 minutes. So I think it is better if we pause here, so you have like a smaller chunk of video to catch on. I will start another video that talks about sustainable development in details, so you can go forward to the other ones without having to go through the entire video. So, thank you again for your attention. See you again in the next clip on sustainable development goals.